So remember we talked about Om being that primeval sound of Ichcha, Jnana, Laya. Ichcha means the desire to create the universe, from the yoni upwards. And then, I create a universe and I want to maintain it and manage it. The universe comes into dying at the end of it. And then, in the silence, it dies. And then it's born again. With the next in-breath, Om, another universe is born. Each time I do the Om. And like that, the universe formulates and creates vibrations and energies of words and phrases and, Om Namah Shivaya out there into the universe. And it forms patterns and planets. And, this is the Vac. This is the Saraswati energy creating and designing cosmos. That's happening all the time. Every species, every cell, every planet, every particle is being created by this Vac out there. So the principle in India of the Saraswati came from a river culture. They called it the Triveni. That means 3 rivers. They found, this is the map of where the Saraswati was and the Indus River were. This is from 2500 to 1500 BC. And then it dried up and they had to move east towards Ganges and Yamuna rivers. But in the early days, this was the seat of all the Indian civilization and Indian wisdom. And the Rig Veda comes from this area, and it came from the Himalayas. It poured down, they saw it as a goddess. It poured down into the plains and then down to the sea, and it gave nature, it gave beauty, it gave abundance and agriculture and everything to them. So they looked at this as the mother. They looked at it as a metaphor for the human body. The river came to, this is a beautiful carving done in about the 3rd or 4th century AD in Mahabalipuram in South India, which shows the descent of the Ganga. So when they moved east, they did the stories of the Ganga descending from the Himalayas. And as you can see, the upper part is all the yogis and devas and yoginis and gods and goddesses up there in the upper part. And then from Shiva's locks, it flows down into the human being as serpents and nagins and snakes and comes down that middle passage. And there the elephants are carrying the whole world, and below them are the turtles. And this is the cosmos that without the descent of Ganga or Saraswati or Indus, there would be no Indian civilization. And they found a metaphor for the human body in this, right? This is a beautiful metaphor. And what they found was that the rivers, they always looked for 3 rivers together. And this is a Triveni Sangam. This is in Allahabad in the Kumbh Mela, which is a major festival that occurs every 12 years. And here, all 3 rivers meet at one point. Ganga, Yamuna, and Sutlej. And they meet there. And you get this amazing confluence of energy and people occurring every 12-year cycle called the Kumbh Mela that occurs there, where the rivers meet. What does this symbolize? So the ancients saw that everything was a macrocosm of my biology, my microcosm, right? They looked at everything and said, that is this. This is that, that is this. As above, so below, as below, so above. This paradigm has been in every civilization from ancient Egypt to Sumeria to India. It's the same. And for river people, the place that the river came from was seen as the source from which poured out this amazing wisdom and grace that gave life to everything. And then it poured down the river southwards towards the plains, and it comes down and then flows into the sea at the end of it all. It just goes back into the sea. And the Indian mind, the Sumerian mind, the Egyptian mind saw the Nile the same way. So if you look at the top of the Nile, you'll see the brain with the Pyramid of Giza and all the great cities up there. And then as you go down the Nile, you get all these cities that represent these centers along the spine. And the same thing happens in India. You get this culture of a stream of consciousness that flows down from the mountains, from the head, into the body through the spinal cord and spreads through the whole body. So the spinal cord became the architecture upon which human beings' consciousness was built. And so if you look at all the sacred numbers, they represent the number of bodies they could see in the sky. They saw 7 moving bodies, 7, which were Mercury, Venus, and Sun on one side, Mercury, Venus, and Moon on one side, nearest us, and then on the other side were Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto, and in the middle was the Sun, and we were the entire universe. So you can imagine that they saw 3 below, 3 above, and all connected in some way. This 7 sacred number comes into being because they couldn't see the stars moving, but they saw the 7 bodies moving, right? The 7 bodies were moving. They could sense them, they could see them, they could map them, they could track them. They were able to see that Venus would move like this in a pentacross every time, that Mars would move at this ratio, and Jupiter would move at that ratio, and so on. So they were fascinated by this drama that was going on in space. And you can imagine that in the Himalayas at that time, or anywhere in the world, you could see the Milky Way, clearly, just like you can see in Wales and Scotland and Alaska today, but you have to go far to see the Milky Way. You can't see it anywhere. You can't see it in New York or Delhi or London anymore. It's gone. Maybe in some remote places you'll see it, but you have to climb high or you have to go look for it. And the ancients saw the Milky Way and they said that was the river of the gods. Right? That was the river of the gods. So the stories were always about the churning of that Milky Way into the earth. So they always believed that the Milky Way sent the energy down into the Himalayas and poured through Shiva's lock down Ganga, poured through his lock and into the people, right? And so there was the Milky Way cosmos that they were seeing. There were the 7 bodies and the Himalayas and the river, and the outside body they were seeing, and there was this inner body that they were seeing with the spinal cord and the brain on top that they were trying to make sense of. They couldn't, the early neurobiology. This fascination that Saraswati is playing the Veena, which is actually designed like a brain and a spinal cord. There are actually 24 plus 6 rivets and grooves and frets on this system. And it looks like a giant brain. So on the high pitched note, you're playing right up near the brain, and the lowest notes are down at the fret. Guitars are the same design. And if you look at it, you're looking at a microcosm of the brain and the spinal cord. The spine, 33 vertebrae going down. And Saraswati represents the flow of consciousness, not only of the river coming from the Himalayas into the stream, but the stream of consciousness through my head into my spinal cord, sending it to my whole body. This went really far because the ancients, especially in India, saw the human being as an upside down plant, like a fern. In fact, it's described as a fern in the ancient scriptures, where the roots are in the brain connecting to heaven, and the nerves and the spinal cord are the leaves and blossoming in the human body. So the Indian idea was the tree of life was an inverted idea, the roots above and the leaves below. And they saw the human brain as that root structure that would connect them to cosmos. And that the whole body with its nerves and its spinal cord and its passages and its energies was this kind of awakening of a leafy tree that could come into being. Beautiful, isn't it? And they saw that the descent of grace, the descent of cosmic energy came from above. That's why we always refer to the grace descending down from the brain through the spinal cord. And they kind of correlated it to the neurobiology of experience, of shamanic experience, of plant medicine experience, of meditation experience, that there was a descent. And the energy would pour in to me through these roots that connected me to heaven, to the Milky Way, to the Himalayas, wherever I was connected to these grand energies out there that were mystical and powerful and could be invoked. And then they would come into me, and they realized that they were dealing with 3 different worlds. One was the kind of brain that was processing everything and analyzing everything right here, right? The neocortex. Then it came down to the midbrain and the limbic region and the heart, which was all about how I felt and how my heart was the center of gravity of everything. They calculated it had 72,000 channels coming out of it, connecting to everything. And then it went down to the stomach, where I was an animal, where I was connected to earth. I was greedy and selfish and hungry and sexual and food and power and everything was down there. And if things went wrong down there, then everything would go wrong. If things went wrong in the heart, then I'd become a horrible person. If things went wrong in the head, then I'm overthinking things and I'm analytic, I go neurotic, I go that way. And they realized that there was this imbalance that they could see, right? And they also realized that there was an imbalance between 3 threads of consciousness of how energy moved through the body, the prana, they called it, and how grace descends into the body, the jiva, right? So they called it prana and jiva, right? These 2 concepts. And jiva descends in grace into me, like the river of Saraswati coming into me. And prana is me reaching up through my willpower, right? So the balancing act is between my willpower, which is masculine solar energy, and jiva, which is feminine moon energy coming into me, right? This balance going on all the time. Ida Pingala, always figuring things out. And you can see that if you analyze it in this way, it makes complete sense that the esoteric neurobiology that they were looking at was experiential. They wanted to see what would happen to my stomach if I did certain things, what would happen to my heart if I did something, what would happen to my inner head if I went in there. And they imagined that in this head were yogis and yoginis, and neurons were like, inner receptors that could be perceived and could be interchanged with and talked to. And they connected you to the Milky Way, or the outer Sukshma. That was this energy field around us that connected us to the source, right? So behind all that stuff was the source. And the source was seen as a vibrating principle that seemed to pulse through the whole universe. And the yogis used to try and hear it by closing their ears and listening to the sound of the source, right? This is where the concept of Om and the Pranava comes from in the Rig Veda. It is the concept of the sound behind all sounds. The sound from which all sounds arise. This was the big concept in the Rig Veda and the Vedic Upanishads. If you study the Upanishads, which were the explanation of the Vedas to people, the Om is the only way to connect back to the source of Brahman. And they called the source in those times Brahman. Brahman, brrr, vibrating energy, Brahman, Brahman, vibration, Brahm, Brahm, Brahm. And the principle was that the first emanation was sound. That everything came as a modification of sound. Everything, even light came after sound. It was like there was sound, vibration and waves and particles, and then everything comes into being. And then light stars start burning up, so you get light, and then you get all kinds of stuff happening. When the ancients felt that the sound was the key, and today, we understand from neurobiology that that is very much the case, that we're vibrating beings, and sound is the one that affects us the most, whether it's the vibration of the earth, or the sun, or the moon, or people's words or music affects us the most. Visually, we can handle it, but sounds, we cannot, unless we know what we're doing, we cannot tune into them very well. They affect us. So Vac, the power of mantra, is all about sound, this kind of continuous rippling that's going on. So how do I create sound that alter my consciousness? How do I use sound to alter my consciousness? This is what mantra yoga is all about. Mantra really means for the mind to guide me. It's tantra of manas, meaning mantra, meaning sound, the techniques of using mind to advise myself. Mantra, right? And the verse from the Rig Veda is mananat trayate iti mantra. Mananat trayate iti mantraha. That means by repetition of the sound, you are liberated. In the original translation, it says samsara, which is the cycles of life and death. But the tantric interpretation is you're liberated from the cycles of ichcha, jnana, and laya. That means the rise and fall of being. Desire, creation, knowledge, and sustenance, and then disappearance, dissolution. You are freed from that cycle. You are liberated from the cycles of life and death. Mananat trayate iti mantraha. And the way to do it is called japa, mantra japa, which means the muttering like we did. Japa means mutter, to mutter, like that. Muttering gently, slowly, and thoughtfully of mantras, mantra japa. And mantra yoga is to awaken that consciousness of who I really am in my inner Atma, of Jiva Atma, to Paramatma, the ultimate being, or Shiva, Sada Shiva, through sound.